Hi, everybody. This is Politics by Jake. Before we start, a quick update. Since we recorded this, the Democrats caved cowardly on the spending bill. No spine, no leverage. And Trump got what he wanted. Everything you're about to hear on redistricting, court stacking, procedural choke points explains why that surrender happened and how power is being engineered outside the headlines. This isn't an outlier, it's the plan. Let's break it down. And now on with the show. All right, this is Politics by Jake. This is the November 9th edition, and I am your reporter, commentator, 2025, of course. I am your reporter. For those of you who are listening, there's a catalog of all my shows at kcaaradio.com/politics by Jake, and it has all the shows, and you might catch the date of 2024 or 2023 or something. That's why I say that. Anyway, I'm your reporter, your commentator, and your advisor. My name is Jake, and I'm speaking from Los Angeles, which is the city of the angels. And each week we bring a strategic briefing, an overview of world-shaping events, a map, if you will, of the forces driving history and the moves that matter. And the aim is simple: to help those wherever they stand add their weight to the right side of history, to reveal not only what's happening, but why and what it means for those of you out there who are politically active and are determined to act. So it is that we have this weekly strategy briefing, complete with indications, suggestions, implicit, explicit, what have you, about what you can and indeed should do in order to secure a better future, a better historical outcome for our time. And the main issue for the foreseeable future is to the need to secure an early end to the Trump presidency, either formally or simply de facto, at the current rate, malevolent, destructive innovation, the damage brought by Trump, the orgy, and we're actually gonna talk about the orgy later on in the show, but the orgy of demolition psychosis, where he has literally destroyed part of the White House. And you know the saying that is abroad in the land about Trump: everything that Trump touches dies. And we all need to be concerned about this. It's not just the Democrats that need to be concerned with it, it's actual conservatives. And the actual conservatives, they're a lot different than Trumpists and MAGAists. A conservative and a Trumpist or a MAGAist are not the same thing. And also people of goodwill everywhere who don't want to see this wholesale wanton destruction of the United States. And that's what it is, by the way. And I'm not kidding when I say that. But we did have elections. I'm worried about 2026. I don't know if that's going to occur or not. And we've talked about that, and we will definitely now, especially because of what's happened. Because Trump got his ass kicked. Voters in several states cast ballots in a closely watched, on Tuesday, in a closely watched off-year election, including races for New York City mayor and governors in Virginia and New Jersey. In New York City, Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani got 50.4% of the vote. He defeated former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who got 41.6, which is respectable percent. A centrist Democrat who ran as an independent, and a Republican whose name is Curtis Sliwa. And Sliwa got 7.1%. And people were conjecturing that he had as much as 15%, but in the end, when the votes were tallied, he only got 17.1. And some of my colleagues were wringing their hands, so to speak, because they were saying, Sliwa needs to drop out of the race because that 15% would go to Cuomo, and that would, because, obviously they're for Sliwa, that means they're not for Mamdani. And that would put him over the top. But it didn't happen, and the people have spoken, and That's the way it turned out. He only got 7.1%, and that really wouldn't have helped Cuomo. The 34-year-old Mamdani becomes the first Muslim mayor and the first Asian American mayor of the nation's largest city. More than 2 million people voted in this election, surpassing total votes cast in any previous New York City mayoral election since 1969. And that was, in those days, that was John Lindsay. And I remember that. In Virginia's gubernatorial race, a Democrat and a former United States Representative, Abigail Spanberger, beat Republican Virginia Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears, becoming the first woman elected to that role. Spanberger held a 57 to 42, basically 57 to 42%, with 97% of the votes in. Democrats also won the lieutenant governor's seat and the state's attorney general race. In New Jersey, Democratic Representative Mikey Sherrill beat Republican Jack Ciattarelli in a closely watched race that tightened in the final weeks in the polls, but it ended as a double-digit victory for Mikey Sherrill. Tally early this morning, rather I should say in California, voters approved, and this is big, they approved an amendment 64% to 36%, an overwhelming majority, establishing, I mean, you want to talk about a landslide? Trump talks about 1.5%, which using the most favorable method of counting the votes, most favorable to Trump. Trump only won the popular vote by 1.5%. In California, Proposition 50, which established a temporary new congressional map that could shift as many as 5 seats to Democrats, and is a response to the outrageous action of the Trump enthrall Republicans in Texas. And Texas, just politically, it's always been for a long time now, it's been a crazy state. It's definitely a state hostile to Democrats. Need I remind you that it was in this state that Kennedy was assassinated? But it's hostile for other ways. They've got, I mean, I'm sorry, but they've got unhinged people as the governor and the executive, the lieutenant governor, and they've just got unhinged people in the legislators. It's just not a good situation. But the Proposition 50 was in response to this, and the important thing about this is that this redistricting that the Republicans tried to do, directed by Trump because they're deathly afraid of him and they are enthralled to him. It means they are enraptured. It means that they are in a kind of hypnotic, blissed out state with regard to him. And they consider him to be like king or monarch, which is exactly why we have had, ever since the ascension of Trump, which is an illegal ascension, but we'll talk about that later. We've talked about it on the show many times already. All of the districts are mapped out, and they're only supposed to be changed every 10 years. And I'm going to take some time now to explain this to you and explain to you how this works, because this is important. This is something everybody needs to understand, because it's part of the way Project 2025 and Trump, who is, Trump is just like a doofus. The people behind him are far more the technicians, the ideologues. They are far more interested in changing all these things. And one of the ways they're doing it is they get a doofus or moron like Trump, who doesn't know anything about any of this stuff, to go ahead and make these statements, and then people go ahead and do them, and they know that these things will have to be challenged in the courts. So they try to pack the courts and make sure that, especially at the level where it counts, which is the appeals courts and the Supreme Court, they have Trump justices in there who are beholden in significant amount of cases for their for their position, their prestige, their entitlement, so on and so forth, to Trump, and so that they will rule in his favor. You have a corrupt Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, they're but two examples. I'm not honestly so sure about the so-called liberal justices on the court either. I remember Elena Kagan in 2010 at her Senate hearings who said we are all originalists now. This is just an unbelievable statement for a liberal, and I use the word loosely because I don't like the word liberal. It's not really reflective. Progressive is actually better, but it's an unbelievable statement for someone who's supposed to be a progressive justice, and you would hope to be a progressive justice, to make. Because the Constitution is not written in stone. It's a progressive document. The Ninth Amendment clearly states that any rights that are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution at the time it was written are reserved to the people. So that means that there's more rights. So this in itself, plus the ability to amend the Constitution, means that it's not an originalist document and that it can be changed and it can be improved. And the Founding Fathers inserted things inside them that state and that strongly imply that it can be improved and it should be improved. And what they wrote down is not the be-all and the end-all by any means. But you see, this is the situation we have where Kagan decided to do this. And anyway, this is why I say I'm not so sure about the so-called liberal justices. But okay, let's explain this, all right? I want to explain to you how this works because, as I said before, the Republicans, and I use the word, loosely, they game these things. They look at these things and they say, how can we turn these things in our favor? How can we weaponize these things? And they have hit upon redistricting. So let's talk about that for a minute. And I actually think this is a good point at which to take a break. So let's do that. Let's take a break. And this is Politics by Jake, and we will be back to talk about this really interesting subject. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And I promised to talk to you about this redistricting thing, and I want to break down, I'm going to break it all down, but I want to break down first how we got to this moment and what Donald Trump and his associates did to precipitate this mid-decade redistricting. And like I said, this only happens every 10 years. It's not supposed to happen in the middle of the 10 years. In other words, mid-decade, so in 5 years. So this mid-decade redistricting push in Texas, and the obvious, based on what happened with Prop 50, the obvious broader national echo. And I'll state it in plain terms. I won't sugarcoat it. Number one, for context, so that you understand, the Republicans hold a razor-thin ascendancy on the House. The GOP holds a narrow majority in the United States House of Representatives. Losing it in 2026 would be a major setback for Trump's agenda and influence. And by the way, right after the election, Trump said the reason we lost was because I wasn't on the ballot. This is more of the delusion, the true delusion that makes Donald Trump what he is, that made the New York media call him the mouth, because he's so plainly deluded. When you talk about Trump derangement syndrome, yeah, naturally, the MAGists, they want to say, oh, it's all of those who disagree with Trump, they're deranged. No, it's the opposite. Trump is the mentally ill one, and he is. He has very tough psychological conditions and emotional conditions that he's dealt with all his life, and they've never been addressed. Talk to Dr. Russell Razak, who I have on this show regularly. Talk to Bandy Lee, who I've had on this show. Talk to Mary, his niece, who I've had on the show as well. And talk to any of thousands of mental health providers who plainly see the problems of what has been called since 2017 the dangerous case of Donald Trump, because he is dangerous. And so, typically, predictably, he blamed everybody else. He elevated himself above everybody else and said, well, this happened because I wasn't on the ballot. Like, heck, you weren't on the ballot, dude. This was all about you and about your couturier of clown shoes and wire hangers. This was all about you. All right, so that was a little digression. Let's get back to this. So the GOP holds a narrow majority. It's not a landslide. And losing it in 2026, Trump knows. And the cognoscenti among the Republicans know. And, you know, as I said, I used the term Republican loosely because these people are divorced from the party of Lincoln. These people are not the party of Lincoln. So, but losing it in 2026, that would be a major setback. Because if the Democrats took the House, and don't worry, I mean, maybe worry is not the word. Don't fret when you hear about Carolyn Levitt or some of these other people talking about how great Trump is and how everything. This is propaganda. This is nonsense. The seriousness of the Trump position, you can't underestimate it. This is one of the reasons why why Speaker Mike Johnson, or I should say, the Mike Johnson puppet who Donald Trump speaks through when he wants to style himself as not only the President of the United States, but also the Speaker of the House. He just pulls out the Mike Johnson puppet, and the Mike Johnson puppet does the things that he wants him to do. And he's a lickspittle, and it's shameful, and it's degrading, it's self-degrading, and it's disgusting how he has lowered himself and compromised himself. And I'm talking about Mike Johnson now. For Trump, that ship has long since sailed. The moral compromise, the ethical compromise, that's gone. I'm talking about Mike Johnson. And the shameful way that he has actually done this. So the Mike Johnson puppet comes out and will not reconvene the House. Why? Well, there are a couple of reasons, but one of the reasons is because one of the first things he would have to do is seat Adelita Grijalva, who is the newly elected representative for Arizona's congressional district. And it's been 41 days since her victory. There was a special election on September 23rd, 2025, and she won that seat actually to succeed her late father. And he was a long-serving U.S. representative. His name's Raul Grijalva. And she's going to be the first Latina, by which I mean Latino woman, so Latina with a feminine on the end, to represent Arizona in Congress. This is big. All of the things that have happened, all of the elections, they're all a repudiation of the reactionary, fascist, MAGAist clown show that is currently trying to retain ascendancy and power over Washington. And one of the first things it's going to do, and the Mike Johnson puppet knows this, of course, Trump speaks through the Mike Johnson puppet. It's possible that Mike Johnson, like most puppets, doesn't have a brain. But let's just assume for the sake of argument that he has a passing intelligence. He knows that the first thing he does, if he has to, and he's going to have to do it at some point, swear in Adelita Grijalva, is she's going to go straight to the cloakroom and she's going to sign a disclosure petition on the Epstein files. And they're going to force a vote on that. And they're going to do other things too. And it doesn't even matter if they lose the vote. If they lose the vote, they win the vote. Because they can point to the Republicans and puppet Mike Johnson, and they can say, you're withholding disclosure. And they are. They're absolutely doing that. And like the Prop 50 vote, which was like 64 to 36%, she won with 71% of the vote. 71% of the vote. This is all very expressive of what's going on. Just not even a year into the second Trump abomination presidency. Trump wants to call his abomination of a bill the big beautiful bill. I'm going to call his administration the abomination that makes desolate administration of Donald Trump. Because everything that Donald Trump touches dies. And we know this. There are many examples. And generally speaking, after she signs the disclosure petition, it's to force a vote. It's just going to create more problems because, as I said, they have this razor-thin majority. They can posture, they can pose, they can pontificate, they can pretend, they can pronounce. Wow, holy alliteration, Batman. Carolyn Lionvit can get up and do her thing, which she does so well, like the Harvey Korman character in Blazing Saddles, who gathered the coterie of criminals, cutthroats, and as they were going off to do their thing, led by the character played by Slim Pickens. Just excellent movie. Now go do that voodoo that you do so well. Carolyn Levitt and the other pontificators and postures and pretenders can do that voodoo that they do so well. But it's only going to go so far. They know the trouble that they're in. And Adelita Grijalva is just another nail in the coffin. So, okay. So, this having said, what have they decided that they're going to do? At this point, let's take a break. This is Politics by Jake, and we will come back in just a moment to talk about this very interesting topic. See you in a minute. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Okay, hi, and we're back, and this is Politics by Jake, and we're going to continue talking about this. And we got up to the point where we were talking about the razor-thin majority in the House and Adelita Grijalva, and how one of the reasons, well, two of the reasons, that the puppet Mike Johnson, who is the puppet Speaker of the House, because Donald Trump has publicly stated that he is the Speaker of the House and not Mike Johnson. So the Speaker must only be a puppet. And this is an example of the humiliation and the scorn that Trump heaps upon everybody. There are so many stories that describe this. I don't know why anyone adheres to him. I don't know why he has any popularity at all, because he's just, this is not a good guy. But all right, so anyway, they do. The puppet Mike Johnson gets to be Speaker of the House just as long as he's a puppet for Donald Trump. And I talked about how Carolyn Leavitt and get it, okay, all right. How Carolyn Leavitt can say all she wants, and all of these guys, and they do, they're the loyal opposition. They persist. They say the things that they want to say, but this is the situation. They now see, and they saw it before, but they now see clearly the results of the November election, and they see the handwriting on the wall. You remember the handwriting on the wall? Those of you who know your Bible, meeny, meeny, tekel, parson, Wade, Wade, found wanting. Yeah, that's really a thing. Go look in the Bible. I think it's in the book of Daniel. I'm not sure. I did my regular from New York. I did my usual tenure in Catholic institutions like Fordham and Iona, but I'm not. I think it's in the book of Daniel. But anyway, check it out. Many, many tekel parson, and it was written in the eyes of one of the leaders of the people, and at that very night, his kingdom was destroyed. That's Donald Trump. And those of you who know the Bible, call into the show if you want and talk to me about that, and I'll articulate the story more. That's that, and make no mistake, that's what's going on. That's what they see. That's why the House has not been reconvened. That's why the closure of the government has been done as a desperate attempt, and it's a desperate attempt, to get the Democrats to knuckle under so that they can complete their theft of $880 billion over 10 years, the theft of SNAP benefits, the theft of LIHEAP, the theft of all of it, under the color of authority of the bill called the Big Beautiful Bill, which is the big abomination that makes desolate of a bill. So, just Politics by Jake, political education. We tell you how things really are. This is how it is. So, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're a Republican. You're a puppet Mike Johnson. Of course, puppet Mike Johnson does not have a brain. Donald Trump speaks through him. Otherwise, nothing happens. And I would say most of the guys in the House who are Republicans, nothing happens with them either. So what do? Well, you've got to do everything you can to proscribe, which means to prevent the democratic process from occurring. Because if the Democrats win the House, do you know what's going to happen? What's the political remedy for malfeasance or nonfeasance in office? Did I hear someone out there in the audience say, impeachment, impeachment? Did I hear somebody say impeachment? That's what it is. It's impeachment. There will be a rash of impeachment proceedings in Washington. And the Republicans, Carolyn Leavitt, and the rest of them, propagandists, will say, oh, poo-poo-poo, the Democrats, oh, poo-poo-poo. They don't want this at all. It doesn't matter that Trump was not convicted in the Senate, in the Republican-held Senate. It doesn't matter. They don't like this at all. It's a bad mark, and they know it. It's a black mark on the escutcheon, the personal escutcheon of each person, and Stephen Miller's going to be one of them. Kristi Noem's going to be another. Tom Homan's going to be another. Mark Rubio, little Marco, he may skate. He may get away with it. And you can bet your bottom dollar that Donald Trump will be yet another. So, okay. And they saw this. And this is the thing that you have going on. They do internal polling. They know which way the wind is blowing. So, okay, what do? Well, this started before the November elections. Texas matters. And this is where this started, by the way. With 38 congressional seats, any shift there is going to move the needle. Trump and his allies believed if they could just redraw already favorable maps before the next midterms, they could already lock in an advantage. This goes to show you they knew. They knew and know how tenuous their grip, how razor thin their hold on power is. So, okay. So all the way back on July 15th, 2025, Trump publicly, he just came out and stated, and probably nobody else could do this, just the brazenness, and he's such a doofus. He's such a know-nothing. Trump publicly stated that Texas could pick up 5 seats via a simple redrawing. The White House and the United States Department of Justice reportedly pressured Texas Republicans to initiate a mid-cycle map change. And initially, the GOP leadership showed reluctance, and I'll explain why in a minute. But basically, it's that this is only done once every 10 years. This is just extraordinary to change the maps in the middle of the decade, okay? But after Trump's involvement, some entreaties, including Pam Blondie, and she's going to be one of the ones who's going to be impeached also, they moved to schedule a special session and redraw the map. So a special legislative session was called by that tool, Greg Abbott, the Texas governor. Talk about a clown shoe. I mean, I'm sorry, but he is. He just really is. I could do probably 2 or 3 shows just on that guy alone, and what a clown he is. So Greg Abbott in July 2025 addresses redistricting, and a new map was passed by the puppet Trump enthrall legislature in the state of Texas in August 2025. Both the Texas House and the Senate approved the plan. Totally just not in keeping with the Mos Maiorum, which is you'll pardon me. Jake took 8 years of Latin. He was going to be an archaeologist. He was going to be Indiana Jones. And so he's got to use it somewhere. And so he's using it now. So Mos Maiorum is Latin. And it means the ways and the customs of the elders that kind of have the force of law. And so this is a violation of the Mos Maiorum, the customs and ways of the elders. And it was signed into law on August 29th. And the proposed map aimed to produce plus 5 Republican-leaning congressional seats in Texas, and it was done because it was so unfair. Everyone's so unfair to Trump. So a recent federal appeals court ruling allowed Texas to rethink so-called coalition districts, which is that's districts where minority groups join forces. The GOP used that to justify a redraw. Texas has continued to grow and shift demographically, opening new opportunities for MAC drafters to target. That doesn't change any of the fact that this is a preemptive and outrageous tactic. The aim was to revise the map before the 2026 election, bypassing the usual once-per-decade cadence tied to the sentence, which is that Mos Maiorum, which is that ways and customs of the elders, of the fathers, of the ancients, that has the force of law. And this was going to give the GOP an early advantage. Now, the fallout on this, Democratic legislators in Texas staged a walkout. They tried to deny a quorum. I think they literally fled the state and they went into hiding. They were trying to delay the vote. Civil rights groups, minority voting rights organizations, they've all filed lawsuits. And it'll be interesting to see if this even gets enacted for the 2026 elections. They're arguing that because all you have to do is go in there and say irreparable damage could occur before a hearing could be had thereon. There should be, in order to show cause, there should be a temporary restraining order. This should not be allowed to go into effect. Pendente lite, which is another Latin term, which means during the time when the court is trying to decide the issues. And I'll 10 will get you 20. It's going to be granted. And this isn't even going to go through. But this is how these things work. This is part of the tactic of Project 2025, of the Heritage Foundation. You heard at the beginning of the last show, Paul Weyrich, he talked about goo-goo. He said too many of our Christians have the goo-goo syndrome, and he described goo-goo as good government. Really? A Christian decrying those who desire good government? Really? but he was like the co-founder of the Heritage Foundation. These are these guys. These are the guys that you're dealing with. So, okay, at this point, we've actually gone beyond the segment time. Let's take another break, have a quick commercial, and then we'll get back to this and talk about this some more. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And the last thing we talked about, we're talking about this mid-decade redistricting ploy, which is part of the tactic of Project 25, part of the tactic of the Heritage Foundation, these renegade Christian Republicans who actually say things, and I used the clip of Paul Weyrich, I could even insert it again, but I won't, about how literally decrying Christians from doing things and wanting actual good government. And I talked about how Democratic legislatures in Texas, some of them, at least some of them, I think all of them, they fled the state so that they couldn't be found, and they were hidden. Places like Illinois hid some of them, California hid some of them. Civil rights and groups, minority voting rights organizations, they all filed lawsuits, and I stated that there's some question whether this is even going to be enacted, because these lawsuits are going to be going through. There's going to be an order to show cause. There's going to be a temporary restraining order or a preliminary injunction preventing this from going into effect. But I also said these are the tactics of these Heritage Foundation, these Christian clerical fascists who do these things. These are their tactics, and other states are watching. Some of the blue states are responding and have succeeded, and that's what Prop 50 is about, with their own redistricting efforts, and they're arguing that there have to be countermaneuvers. So let me get back to what I was talking about before. At the federal level, the United States Census Bureau conducts a population count every 10 years. That's why it's every 10 years. That's why the redistricting can only occur every 10 years, because it's based on the census. It's based on the population count. And following each census, the process of what is called apportionment, which is dividing the 435 House seats among the states, that's when that happens. And at that time, redistricting, which is drawing the internal district boundaries inside state, is typically done at that time. And then that reflects these population shifts and the representation in the House. The National Conference of State Legislatures says redistricting is the process of redrawing every 10 years. Note this, every 10 years following the decennial U.S. Census. This is the way things are done. A state like California, the state constitution and the statute provide that independent redistricting commission draws boundaries every 10 years after the census. So this is grounded in both federal census practice and state law in many cases. Now, what these reactionary and fascists are counting on and what they're hanging their hat on is kind of what I explained before. This is not necessarily a universal legal prohibition on mid-cycle redistricting. There's no federal, constitutional, or statutory rule that absolutely positively forbids states from redrawing congressional or state legislative, for that matter, districts at other times. When the Republicans were out of power during the Biden administration and, arguably before this. I mean, look, the Heritage Foundation, it goes back to 1980 and before. They've been planning this for decades and decades and decades. This is all known. The Congressional Research Service says mid-decade congressional redistricting is prohibited by neither the United States Constitution or federal law. So we have to acknowledge that some states have explicit prohibitions in their constitutions or statutes against the usual mid-cycle redistricting, but others don't. There are at least 11 states that explicitly prohibit mid-decade redistricting. The usual practice has been once per decade, like I say, the old Romans, the mos maiorum, the ways and customs of the elders and the fathers, has been once per decade. But the fact that parties are now doing it mid-cycle shows that the rule is less of an absolute and more like a guideline. So in other words, the issue is being forced. So, what's the basis for the 10-year rule in practice? Well, it's a mixture of factors. You have the federal census schedule. The decennial census is every 10 years. It always has been. Redistricting naturally follows to reflect population shifts. This is just the way it's always been done. Many states embed a decennial redistricting schedule. California's Independent Commission, that's a good example, into their laws. And here's mos maiorum, custom and precedent, what I was just talking about. Because states traditionally align redistricting with apportionment and census timing, the once per decade becomes the expectation. Practicality and fairness. Frequent redistricting could undermine stability. It could lead to constant. I mean, if it could be done once every 5 years, why couldn't it be done once every 4, or every 3, or every 2, or every 1, or every 6 months? See, there has to be some balance. And what the Republicans are proposing is upsetting that balance for the gains for themselves, for the gains of their power. So if this were done too frequently, it could undermine stability. It could lead to constant map fishing for partisan gain. So this is, why you have this norm. It standardizes things. And while federal law doesn't forbid mid-cycle changes, any redistricting must still comply with Equal Population Rules, Voting Rights Act, so on and so forth. Of course, we know how the Republicans feel about the Voting Rights Act. Now, in the context of Proposition 50, which dramatically passed, overwhelmingly passed, talk about a landslide, 64% to 36%, that's a landslide. And Proposition 50 seeks to allow a temporary mid-decade redrawing of congressional maps in California before the 2030 census. And the official summary says that the current map, which was drawn, by the commission that does that, it's called California Citizens Redistricting, would be replaced with a legislature-drawn map for the period of time from 2026 to 2030, and then the independent commission would resume after the next sentence. And that move is controversial because it departs from the state's usual every 10 years after the census process. League of Women Voters, other reform groups note that the mid-cycle redrawing conflicts with longstanding good government principles, but this is being done to counter what's happening in Texas. And if someone says districts can only be redrawn every 10 years, that's mostly true. As a norm, as a custom, as the way that things are usually done in connection with other things, and in many state laws, but it's not strictly legally, it's not universally true. So the right question is what does the state's constitution or statute say? And has there been a court precedent enforcing a prohibition on mid-cycle changes in that state? In California state, the norm is 10 years via the independent commission, but Prop 50 is attempting to temporarily override that norm via a constitutional amendment, which itself is legally valid, which is why they did it that way. if the state follows its amendment procedure. So this isn't purely custom. There is a legal basis for the 10-year cycle in many states via the law or pursuant to law. But the prohibition on doing it sooner than that, it's not a uniform federal rule, and variations do occur. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. If you think owning things in your own name keeps you in control, think again. In today's world, lawsuits, taxes, and predators are everywhere. That's why the smart money hides in plain sight. We help you to build legal firewalls, LLCs, land trusts, private contracts that protect your assets while keeping you invisible. Call Twain Consulting today at 310-997-2204. Find us on Facebook at Twain Consulting. That's facebook.com/Twain Consulting. Protect what you've built before someone else takes it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. This is Jake, here to tell you the world is on fire, only you're not being told who actually lit the match. Politics by Jake on KCAA. The world is unraveling fast. Governments are weakening, markets are crashing, chaos is looming. You need more than hope. You need a plan. Collapse Protocol gives you the tools to protect your assets, secure your future, and survive the storm. Don't wait for the collapse to hit. Prepare now. Visit Twain Consulting at facebook.com/Twain Consulting or call 213-465-0639. Collapse Protocol, your shield when everything else fails. Okay, so we're running short on time. I have so much that I want to talk about. We're in the aftermath of the elections. The aftermath of this election, incredibly consequential, incredibly important, and it deserves a forensic analysis, which is, in other words, after it happens. It deserves to be looked at to determine what it means. And I've talked about Zohran Mamdani before the election. You have the city of New York. He's been elected as the mayor. He was elected significantly. It was something like 50% to 40%. Cuomo was able to garner 41%. But it's a seat change for New York. And of course, this is New York, as I said, arguably the most important city in the United States. I appreciate other cities might call into the show and say, Jake, Chicago is, Evanston, Wyoming is, just, whatever it is. It ranks among the most absolute positive, Evanston, Wyoming, most important cities in the world. And people, including myself, have been arguing against it. But the people have now spoken. And what I want to explore is what Mamdani represents, which are reasons to keep going with business as usual, and business as usual, frankly, would have been Cuomo. But what I want to talk about while I'm talking about his mayoralty may be tokens, would it be tokens? Because this is a guy with no experience, no resume, no curriculum vitae resume. And he has ascended out of nowhere, as it were. Although, you want to be careful when you talk about people arising out of nowhere into a very powerful position in government in the executive chair. But this may just be a bellwether that we need to pay attention to about the reorganization of the Democratic Party. Because this has occurred because people don't like business as usual. This is not working for them. So, in addition to this, I have Mamdani's election, but it's more. You have the first Muslim woman elected to a statewide office in the U.S., that's Ghazala Hashimi, who won Virginia's lieutenant governor election. Now you can say, and now I am tempted to say, because I love America and the potential that it has, which is expressed here, that this is a reflection of the egalitarian nature of America. But I also, and I am saying that, and I do love America, and I do love that about America. But I also want to sound an alarm, or at least a warning of sorts, And that is what we're going to be spending, a little time on. You have Prop 50, California, as I say, overwhelmingly coming out of this. And this is a rebuke to the Trump administration. Trump hates California. And California returns the favor and hates Trump, even though a lot of people voted for him in California in the presidential election. But it's pretty evident that Prop 50 passed with like 54% of the electorate. You have a situation where California is its reputation, it's a living, breathing, pulsing repudiation of the Trump spewing repudiation of the Trump doctrine of everything, including tariffs, because you have the California economy, which is what, the fourth largest economy in the world, in the entire world. It is so big that it contributes $81 billion in tax revenues to the federal government. And you look at what Trump is trying to do with these fakakta, nonsensical tariffs that he's imposing, which are up before the Supreme Court right now. It'll be interesting to see what happens on that. And there is no more evidence of someone trying to fix something that isn't broken than there is when you look at California, who is rich. It's prosperous, it's diverse, it's pulsating, it's spewing, it's alive. It's everything the degraded Trump administration is not, and their doctrines. And that's why he hates California so much. And so I would say to all of those of you who look upon the machinations and insanity, and it is insanity, and it is paranoia, and it is narcissism, and it is malignant narcissism, and it is dysfunction of Donald Trump and his administration and those fascists, and you must say that they are fascists. You kakistocratic people like Christian Texas, Tom Homan, the other doctrinaire ideologues there, Steve Bannon, he's still in there, Curtis Yarvin, who thinks that the United States ought to become a monarchy. California is a repudiation, and it's a stunning, if you happen to be one of the ones who believes in those things that I just described, it's a stunning and devastating repudiation of all of that. And by derogation to the other states and the unions that follow the economic political doctrines of California, and that follow the diversity, that follow the inclusivity, that repudiate people like Paul Weyrich, who sneered and mocked the interests of the people in good government and wanted to proscribe and limit the people who could vote in elections. Here, you have the voice of the people. You have it in New York as well. These are all resounding rebukes to the Trump administration, and I think that you have two things. Number one, you're going to have really interesting elections in 2026. And number two, you're going to have an uptick of opposition by the reactionary fascist administration of Donald Trump. Look for it. It's already started. Look for it. It's just going to get... What was it that Betty Davis said in that one movie? Hang on, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Look for it and hang on. It's going to be a bumpy ride as the administration of Donald Trump tries to prevent, prohibit, prescribe, or otherwise in any way they can have a chilling effect on free and fair elections. And you're going to hear him continue to repeat the lies, the ridiculous lies about the 2020 election being stolen. You're going to hear more, and you're going to hear the vermin that inhabit the Trump administration and crawl around the walls, that hold his coat. Well, this arrogant man-child who was deformed in his psyche at the age of 5, basically because he realized that mommy and daddy didn't love him, and they never would love him. He does the things that he does to destroy, in his rage, in his existential rage, and I do mean destroy, the United States of America. And you're going to see him come out of the woodwork with all their hatred and all their bile and all their disinformation and all their invective and so on. So that's what we do, and off we go. We're off now to the races. Time moves forward, doesn't move backwards, even though the reactionary tech likes it too. So On down the road of this democratic republic we go. And this is Politics by Jake. The next scheduled edition of Politics by Jake will be November 15th at 11 a.m. Until then, keep up the fight. Good luck, and we'll see you then. Bye now. Imagine that you stop all of a sudden and take a moment and look around you. The systems are failing. The currency, the court, the Constitution, and no one is coming to save you. You feel it, you see it, but you've been told to ignore it. This isn't paranoia. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's collapse. Designed, accelerated, and now unavoidable. So what's your plan? What happens when the banks close? When the grid goes down? When they come knocking and you have nothing protected, nothing structured, nothing left? You don't need a bunker. You need a protocol. The collapse protocol is the plan for people who still think clearly, who want to live, thrive, and protect what's theirs, even in a world gone mad. You don't have time. You don't have backup. But now you have this. Collapse Protocol from Twain Consulting before the end begins. Contact us as soon as you can. Facebook.com/Twain Consulting or call us at 213-465-0639.